Joined today by Coach Duane Simpkins with George Mason University. And Coach, my first question for you is, have you ever had personal experience with either nonviolent police harassment or with non-lethal police brutality?
I have not had like a physical altercation. I've had probably more than several situations where it was just complete disrespect. And I knew it was, but like my dad always said, just make it home. That was the main thing. Pulling me over for rolling through a stop sign, pull over. Did you see the stop sign? I did. My apologies, officer. Just wasn't paying attention enough. Well, then that's when the tone and the belittlement, and you've got to, you got to bite your tongue, because that one thing that you say with an aggressive tone could escalate. That's happened a number of times. I remember when I got the job at UNC Greensboro, and I would come back to Maryland because my family was still here. I would come back probably every couple of weeks or whatever. And man, I could tell you that summer, talking about over a 3-month period, probably getting stopped 6 or 7 times. And I know probably 3 of those times I was speeding, but the other times, no. And it was always one little section. I made sure that even though Waze told me to go this particular way, it was kind of a back way to get to 95 North. I just took 95 all the way from the Greensboro to Raleigh and on up. I just try to avoid those situations at all costs. But again, the feeling that you have though afterwards is like, somebody punched you in the face and you know who did it, and they're just looking at you, and it's like, yeah, what are you going to do? But again, the ultimate goal is to make it home safe, and that's the only thing I think about.
So it makes you feel disrespected as a human, some of these interactions. Yeah. So it sounds like you've experienced unlawful stops. Sometimes you rolled a stop sign, sometimes you might have been speeding, but other times no. Mm-hmm. And then you've also experienced just an unnecessary, disrespectful attitude as well. And
almost like they were inciting it to some degree, almost as if, they've done this before, and it's like, I'm going to push you until, you do say something that I feel is aggressive, and now we've got this confrontation. That's the sense that I always got.
And my follow-up is, I'm curious, of your closest circle of Black male adult friends, roughly what percentage of them have had an experience with either nonviolent police harassment or blatant disrespect that was unprovoked and that type of thing?
I couldn't tell you an adult friend of mine who would say to you, I've never had an encounter. I don't have any friends like that, unfortunately. None of them have had obviously a lethal incident. I've had some where, they were, told to get out of the car, spread hands on the hood of the car, what have you. Everything from, hey, you fit the profile of somebody that, we're looking for, or, hey, do you have drugs in the car? That this is an area for drug activity. I'm like, you're going to stop everybody. But yeah, that's, I have not had one person that I know of that's an adult African-American that has not had that situation.
First of all, I'm glad you used some of those words. This is a high drug area, or you fit a description. These are things that occur in part because of the off-the-books training of how do you justify an unconstitutional stop based on Supreme Court rulings. Well, you slide words like that in there. The same way when they're beating the crap out of a defenseless human, they're yelling, stop resisting, the whole time. It's just the off-the-books training. And so essentially what I just heard you say is that while you haven't conducted a formal survey amongst your 15 or 20 closest Black friends who are men, your ballpark guess is if it's not 100% who've had those types of experiences, it's awfully close to it. Is that fair to say?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt.
With this in mind, would you consider the problem of connected nonviolent police harassment with non-lethal police brutality and the murders and lynchings of unarmed Black people, assuming there's a connection there, would you say these things collectively are isolated or more pervasive?
Obviously, I believe there is a connection, and I would say that these situations are more pervasive than anything. Um, I get the sense that they know that they are the quote unquote law and order, and they have the upper hand. Um, and in the back of our minds, we're always, I know myself, I'm always like, hey, don't let it escalate. Don't let it, because once it does escalate, you know, the ball, the ball's in their court. They're more than likely to avoid any type of penalty if they were to either beat you or worse. I mean, that's documented. Everybody knows that. Everybody in the Black community knew this well before George Floyd. This is not new to us, not at all. And hence the reason why I've had the conversation with my 16-year-old son who's going to be driving soon. Hence the reason why my dad had this conversation with myself and my brother. Hence the reason why I have this conversation with every African-American student athlete that I work with that drives, in particular, the ones especially that have, tint on their windows. I've gone so far as to tell them, they just take the tent off. You just don't want to give them any reason at all to even stop you, even if you're not speeding or rolling through a stop sign. You just don't want to give them any ammunition whatsoever.
Well, and I just want the record to reflect that I've been pulled over when I wasn't speeding or committing another violation, expired tags, but every time it's been in a Black neighborhood. And so even me as a white guy getting unconstitutionally pulled over, it's still based on racism against Black people, because they can't figure out why I might be in a Black neighborhood for any reason other than nefariousness.
So you're probably buying drugs or something, man.
Exactly what the assumption is. And
yeah.
So even when a white guy and to be clear, white people with long hair and Grateful Dead bumper stickers, they do get unconstitutionally harassed as well. Yeah. But that's not a universal thing based on race. And it's not okay, by the way. I'm not saying it's okay, but it's not universal. But even me, if I'm clean cut and my car's washed, all that stuff, even me, when I get pulled over as a white guy, it's based on police racism toward Black people, which is pretty astounding to consider. And I'm curious, Coach, if you got anything else that's on your mind or that you'd like to add.
Well, I should have prefaced this with before we got started. Like, I've gotten stopped a number of times, whether it was because I thought I knew I did something wrong, or it's kind of the gray area. And I've had great interactions with police officers. Yes, sir. No, sir. They say no, sir. Yes, sir. To me, I've been given, say, tickets, and they were very, polite. I've been, say, hey, just going to give you a warning this time. Go ahead. So I should have prefaced that, but more times than not, I probably had more quote unquote negative experiences than I did positive. As it relates to anything else that additionally that I may want to share, a couple things. One, I've done a number of Zooms in the past week with Black and white coaches and administrators in collegiate athletics, and talking specifically about, race relations, the state of the United States right now, in light of everything that happened, the murder of George Floyd. And great conversations, the biggest thing that I tried to get it across, and I got this across to Coach Paulson, our head coach here at George Mason. He and I had a discussion. I think this was a day after the George Floyd murder, and he was appalled. He told me he was appalled about everything, and I stopped him and said, Coach, understand this, because we were talking about what should we say to our guys, what he needs to say. And I said, Coach, first and foremost, you've got to let them know that where you stand with this. They've got to hear it from you. And then furthermore, it can't just be the guys in our locker room. You've got to let everyone know where you stand on this. I said the biggest thing that crushes African Americans is when you have white friends or people that you work with. They'll tell you how screwed up that situation was, but that'll be it. They won't say it to the world. And I'll say, Coach, that crushes us. That really hurts us, because I look at you as my friend. I trust you. You trust me. I know you're a good-hearted person. But to stop short because you feel that, you may ruffle some feathers or someone may not agree with it, and whether it be administration or boosters or what have you. I said that hurts. That really hurts. And that's always been the case. I've always felt that way, but I felt even stronger about it, man, after the George Floyd murder. And the second thing I told him was like, hey, just listen to our guys. Just listen. I said the same thing on the Zooms, like, hey, just listen to your team. They don't need you to say anything. They want to know that they are being heard. So I just think that's really important. And then the other thing is the complicity. I've explained this to a number of people, that when you are complicit and you're not all in voicing your disgust with the state, with specifically the George Floyd murder, with the state of the United States as it relates to police brutality against African Americans and equality. If you're not all in on it, if you're not all in on it, you're just as bad as that Asian police officer who sat there and he knew what was going on over his shoulder, that man was still, he still had his knee on George Floyd's throat. He knew that. And he chose not to do anything. He probably knew it was wrong, but he chose not to do anything. You are no better than that Asian officer that performed that act. So there is no being lukewarm. There's no straddling the line. Like, you have to be all in with your voice, with your actions against police brutality and racism. Point blank. There is no gray area. Not anymore. It can't be.
Well, you really are echoing the sentiments from Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail.
Yeah.
The big problem is not I've said before on these interviews that about 10% of American white people are KKK type people or KKK adjacent. And about 10% of white people are really trying to do what we can to help. And about 80% are what Dr. King called the moderates. And what I'm hearing you saying is that starting today, you got to pick a side.
Yep.
You got to either side with the KKK and KKK adjacent people and look yourself in the mirror and admit that, or you got to jump on the side of righteousness and help us figure this thing out.
Yeah, and those, like you said, that 80% that are moderates, that are lukewarm, the power that you guys have, in addition to our pain and our anger and our numbers, that's what moves the needle. That's what makes the establishment nervous. I mean, Roger Goodell comes out a week ago, whatever, and apologizes. And people like, oh, they didn't mention Kaepernick, and no, they didn't. But the fact that he got in front of a camera and said that, to me, it spoke of, he recognizes that there are enough of those, that 80% that you mentioned, there are enough of them that are upset, in addition to African Americans. This could hurt the bottom line. I tell people all the time, it's very difficult to change people's heart. It really is. But one of the ways that you can change some things, you hit somebody in the wallet, you get their attention. They start to maneuver a little bit differently. And I honestly believe that that Roger Goodell, and I don't even like to call them owners, they own the teams, but I'm not going to call them owners, but I think he recognizes that, hey, we could have a potential problem, because there's a groundswell of not just African Americans, but that 80% that you're mentioning, that tips the scale to much lower viewership, which in turn means much smaller marketing packages with this company or that company, CBS or Fox. That's what needs to happen. That's what needs to happen. Had this happened, all the people that initially wanted to side with Kaepernick and say, hey, I'm gonna boycott watching football. People talked about it, but They didn't do it because had they done it, Kaepernick would have ended up in the league, and there would have been a much different stance and tone by the NFL, I think. So, changing hearts, man, is really difficult. But one of the ways to do it, you got to hit people in the pocketbook.
Well, I'll tell you the three takeaways from your perspective that I'm going to remember and probably repeat later. One, to a certain extent, you said that white people need to listen privately and speak publicly.
That's a great way to put it.
And then two, silence is complicity, and you're no better than the evil-hearted white racist if you're a white person who doesn't speak up and act. And then three, let's stick with it. Let's not have this be a moment. Let's have this be a movement.
Absolutely.
And so I really, we need to do this more often. It shouldn't take something like this to get us on a Zoom call. And maybe next time it'll be a podcast or something and we can go much more in depth. But if you don't have anything else to add, your insights were incredibly valuable. I'm gonna go ahead and let you get back to work, and I really appreciate your time and willing to share your experiences and your insights very, very much.
Well, Peter, I really appreciate you having me on, man. And anytime you want me to come on, to talk further about things like this or hoops or anything, man, I've always respected you, from a distance. The things that you write, they're heartfelt, and you're one of the good guys. So I really appreciate you.
Appreciate you too, brother. We'll talk soon.
All right, now.